Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out for a Good Friday service. Today we celebrate Good Friday. As you know, almost 2,000 years ago today, our Lord Jesus was crucified. He was murdered, killed on the cross. And death and Satan, the enemy, thought it had won. And it really looked like it had. Tonight, we're going to do something special. We're going to celebrate communion, as well as go through the crucifixion story of Jesus. So I want to invite the men down. As they prepare to do that, we're going to be doing communion a little differently tonight. We'll be forming two lines in the middle to come down. We'll be tearing off some bread, and then going out to the sides to receive the juice, and then going back to your seats. So men, you can go ahead. And as they're doing that, if you guys want to start forming the lines and coming on down to the front, come forward and receive the elements. And as you take the bread and the juice, make your way back to your seats, and we'll read the story together and take everything together once everyone has the elements. Lynn, that's for you. In Matthew 26, we see the Last Supper, where communion starts. Verse 26, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And then they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And so we're going to take both of them together. Each time we take communion, we say those words, "This is my body broken for you. This is my blood poured out for you." But how often do we get to pair it with reading the crucifixion story? Jesus' body actually being broken, the blood being poured out for us. And so I'm going to read, and you don't have to worry about turning there and reading along. Instead, I want you guys to listen to the words. You can even close your eyes if you need to, maybe bow your head, and just listen as I read. Matthew 27, starting verse 11. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony that they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" When Pilate saw he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and had handed him over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, where they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him: "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right, one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. From noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over all the land. About 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let us see if Elijah comes to save him." When Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went to the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those who saw him were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Many women were there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. Thinking through that story, everything that leads up to the crucifixion, starting with the Last Supper, of course, John's Gospel, we read that Jesus humbles himself, kneels down, washes his disciples' feet at the Last Supper. And then the meal continues. It continues, and he takes the bread, and he breaks it and tells them, "This is my body broken for you. Take and eat." And then he takes the wine, and he says, "This is my blood, spilled out, poured out for you. Drink it in remembrance of me." And then everything proceeds. He predicts that Peter will deny him. Peter reassures him, "No, I won't." The rest do the same. And then Jesus goes into the garden to pray. He prays earnestly. Luke's gospel tells us he was sweating so profusely, his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. He was in that much anguish from knowing what was going to happen later that night. And his own disciples, who he asked to pray for him, could not stay awake. And of course, Judas comes with the mob, and they arrest Jesus, and Jesus allows himself to be taken before the Sanhedrin, where he's first mocked and spit on and spat in the face of and hit by them. So how is Jesus' body broken? It starts with the Sanhedrin as they hit him. And then when they're finished with him, they pass him on to Pilate, where Pilate interrogates him, and Jesus decides not to defend himself. Pilate, against his own best judgment, allows the crowd to convince him to crucify Jesus. But before this is to happen, they flog him. Now, flogging would have been done with a whip, and on the end of it broke into a few different strands. And in the different strands, they would place different things to cut. Sharp things such as glass, metal, even pieces of bone. As if the whip, the leather, wasn't enough itself. Always thinking of what could cause the most damage to the human body. So Jesus is flogged. And for the Jews, they had a custom, they had a limit. They wouldn't let anyone be flogged more than 39 times, the 39 lashes. Because flogging was so severe, many people would die from it. But the Romans, they didn't have such a limit. They didn't care if someone died from it. There's examples in the New Testament where they flogged someone to death before they could even crucify him. So Jesus receives the flogging. This weakens him so much so that afterwards they try to make him carry his own cross, and he can't. After the flogging, they take him before the guard, before the soldiers, and they mock him. They stand him up, they place the robe upon him, mocking him, saying, "Hail to the King of the Jews." And then they spit on him. With the staff, they beat him, hit him in the head again and again and again, continuing to break his body. And how is his blood spilt? The crucifixion itself, after he was unable to carry the cross, they come to this place called Golgotha. Jesus is laid on the cross, and nails are driven through his wrists. And often we think they're in his hands, the palm of his hands, but the Romans were smarter than that. They put the nails right through the wrists, between the two bones that make up our arms. So then when you're hanging there on the cross, it catches and it doesn't just rip out of your hand. And then a nail is driven through both of his feet to hold him up on the cross. And the cross is hoisted up. With him hanging there, he would have slid down that cross. And I can just imagine with his back flayed open. After the intense flogging, every time his back would slide up and down that cross, the pain, the blood being spilled. But maybe the worst part about crucifixion is that it would suffocate you. That's how you died when you're crucified. See, the Romans, they thought this through. They liked to kill people, but they liked to do it slowly. So crucifixion was the best that they had come up with. Not too fast, not too slow, just painful enough to keep him alive. And as he's hanging there on the cross, already bleeding from his head with the crown of thorns, from his back being ripped open, from his arms and his feet, bleeding from everywhere in his body, as he's hanging there, trying not to fall too far down, because if you do, you can't breathe anymore. And so he has to pull himself back up, get a breath, and go back down, doing that over and over again, each time getting harder and harder until he's got no strength left. And he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? An indescribable moment where Jesus is separated from the Father, where he feels the separation for the first time ever. Possibly more painful for him than all the physical pain at this point. And Jesus cries out and gives up his spirit. And the guards standing there to make sure that he was dead take a spear and pierce him in the side, and blood and water pour out, letting them know he is truly dead. His body broken beyond anything we can imagine. His blood spilled out until there was none left. All for us. So as we take communion today and as we've took it, I want you to continue to think about that. Think about it as the bread and as the juice linger in your mouth. Think of the different ways Jesus' body was broken, the pain he endured, the suffering he endured for us. And think of how his blood was spilled, how his blood ran down his body, how it ran down the cross onto the ground. And the darkness that ensued. The darkness over the whole earth at this point. I want to end with this. That should have been us on the cross. That should have been us. Jesus had no sin, but he took our sin upon himself. Our sins deserve death. Romans tells us that. We've committed the crime. We deserve the punishment. We deserve death. And yet Jesus took all of that for us. So I want us to reflect on that and to remember that. Not just each time we take communion, but as we continue to sing these songs. And the rest of this weekend until Easter.